Woody, I always like to ask the World War II veterans if they remember Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th.
Yes, sir, I do. Have quite a few memories, both of my late wife and the war. That weekend, football season was over at F&M, and I hitchhiked from Lancaster back to Pittsburgh to, her birthday was December 7th. No, 9th, December 9th. And I went back to Pittsburgh to see her for her birthday.
You were a college student?
I was a college student, a freshman at F&M.
Franklin and Marshall
Yeah.
College.
In Lancaster. And season was over, and I decided to go home to celebrate her birthday. She was 17 years old. I wasn't married, just a girlfriend. And I hitchhiked home, and my mother and Ruth took me out where the turnpike in Irwin at that time is where you got on it. And I was out there early in the morning hitchhiking. I got picked up by a truck, 18-wheeler. And I was someplace between the exit after Somerset and Harrisburg when I heard about it on the truck radio. And that's where I was.
Did you at all know what the implications of the bombing of Pearl Harbor would be?
Oh, yeah, I knew about it. I'd read about it and talked. I knew it was problems because in my mind, I knew right away that I was going in.
Why? Had you already made up your mind that you were going to go?
No, not years ago, but when that happened, we were just starting our mid-semester exams. I took one exam and went back home and tried to get in the Navy, and they turned me down because I wore glasses.
Why did you want to join the armed forces?
Young. I still hold a grudge against the Japanese, and everyone else was doing it, and I was just one of the ones but they turned me down.
What kind of a kid were you? What kind of a person were you? I know you were an athlete. Were you a gung-ho kind of personality, I guess?
No.
No?
I don't think so. I was free with my voice and didn't like to be questioned by people, things like that. I was strong-willed, but...
So where did you go to join the Navy, to try to join the Navy?
Pittsburgh. Went downtown, went in, and they didn't even give me a physical as soon as they saw I wore glasses, and they turned me down. At that time, I think they were turning the Air Corps, and people going into the Air Corps and Navy couldn't wear glasses.
Why did you want to join the Navy?
Everyone else was talking about it, and I enjoyed being on water, that's all.
So how did you feel about being rejected by the Navy?
Made me mad, because they never bothered me in sports, never bothered me. All of a sudden, I couldn't wear them or couldn't join. It bothered me. I think it bothered my dad more than it did me, though, because he was emotionally too. But that was it.
And so what did you do after the Navy rejected you?
Pardon?
What did you do after the Navy rejected you?
I went to work in a machine shop up in Springdale, Pennsylvania, and started grinding. I think it was, I don't know what the millimeters were, a shell for artillery. And I worked there for about 3 or 4 months, 50 cents an hour. And I got a promotion into the main shop off the production line in grinding. I was doing cylindrical grinding, precision cylindrical grinding. And I got a deferment for that. I had a 6 months deferment. And I got married in February of 43. And my deferment ran out in June, and I didn't got bought. I could have got another one because I was working for Lawrenceville Screw Company then, and they were making bullets on a screw machine, the projector, and I could have got a deferment because I was married, working in defense, but I'd had 6 months, and that was enough for me. So I got my induction things and went to Greensburg and took my physical.
So why didn't you, so the Navy rejected you, why didn't you just turn to the Army or another branch who would take you after Pearl Harbor?
Be truthful, I think, because I had this girl that pretty well had me tied up because we were married shortly thereafter. And we were married in February.
And why didn't you go back to Franklin and Marshall?
I went, you mean after the war?
No, after the Navy rejected you.
Well, no, I had left Franklin Marshall to go back to Pittsburgh to join it. No, I had enough of college. 1 semester, a war going on, I'd had it.
So so you joined the Army when? Do you remember?
Yeah, I took a physical on June 2nd, 43. And I passed it. I was married by then. I called Ruth and told her I had passed the physical. I was leaving that night. I didn't even go back home. She caught a bus from Pittsburgh up to Greensburg and came up and met me. We had dinner, and I think I shipped out of there about 10 o'clock on a train.
How did your wife feel about you joining the Army?
She knew I was going in.
How did she feel about it?
She thought I should. She thought I should. And we walked around Greensburg till the evening, till my train left. And then I caught the train, she caught the train back to Pittsburgh, and that was it. And probably the best thing I ever did, because normally they give you a 2-week leave before you went in. The group that took the 2-week all went into the infantry. I was lucky enough to get into the engineers for some reason or other. I have no idea why, except that on my discharge papers, they had asked me what I was studying at Franklin Marshall, and I put down civil engineering. That's what I wanted to do. And somehow or other, I think that got me into the engineers because I knew nothing about engineering at that time.
So where did you go, to Fort Meade from Greensburg?
Fort Meade. 2 of us. 2 people out of the group that took there's orders there that in the stuff giving me and this fellow the right train service down to Fort Meade. We left that night. Got in there the next morning, and from there on, they told me what to do.
Did you like that?
I didn't mind it. It took a little bit to get used to, but being in sports all my life, it was the same thing. You're going from one sport to another, and I didn't have any trouble with that part. I didn't have any trouble with the training. I got through all that.
Where did you do your basic training?
At Meade.
Oh, at Meade.
At Fort Meade. We were there until fall, and we were transferred. The whole unit was transferred up to Ethan Allen, Vermont, which was a beautiful post. Enjoyed that.
And what was your unit? Were you assigned to an...
Headquarters. For some reason, I was put in headquarters, but they never found anything for me to do. So I ended up being a truck driver and driving a command car.
And what was the name of, what was your unit? What was your outfit?
159th Engineer Combat Battalion, just an individual battalion. And when we got over in Europe, all we did was move around where they needed someone in combat or else in building roads, water systems, water outlets. It was went from Corps to Army to divisions whenever they needed someone.
When did you go overseas?
I left to the States. I landed in Scotland, Glasgow, July 4th. And I guess it took us 4 days to go over, so I left the country about the 1st of July.
Tell me about the trip over. Where did you leave from and what did you sail on?
We went in a boat, a former, what would you call it, a cruise boat that they had transferred to a troop transport, and they had a lot of people on there. I don't know how many, and I know that we ate in sections. We were up in the deck 4 hours a day or something like that, with string cots to sleep on. But we went over in 4 days without a convoy. We weren't in a convoy. I went up the river into Glasgow and unloaded it in Glasgow on July 4th. I remember that. And we spent the next 15 days picking up equipment. I can remember leaving the camp and I don't remember where the camp was, by truck, loaded drivers, and we'd go into someplace and pick up trucks and bring them back. And we did this once we got the trucks, we started picking up equipment. All we had was our clothes and a rifle when we got there in England. And we were there 16 days because I landed in France on the 20th of July. I drove a 2.5 ton truck with a trailer on off and up through the Omaha Beach area where I saw my first dead. They weren't Americans, they were Germans still lying. And I think we camped just outside of St. Mary-Église, if I can't pronounce it right, because we were there only one night, and that's when they broke out of the hedgerows. And we were on a task force then that took us down to Le Havre. That was our first combat. We lost our first men, I think, the second day out at a bridge. We lost some, I think it was A Company got hit at the bridge, lost a lieutenant and a couple of men at a bridge. And that's what it was just a task force of moving every day towards Le Havre.
I'm trying to imagine you being as a young man and seeing your first dead, enemy after you land in Normandy. Do you remember your thoughts when you saw that?
Oh, I was pretty high. I was ready to go. We'd been pretty well trained. We were trained with the 101st up at Vermont. They were up there, and that was interesting. There was a lot of fights up there.
Yeah, talk about that. So you trained with the 101st Airborne Division.
Oh, there was a lot of competition, and those boys were tough. They were tough. And the engineers thought they were too, but I think they were just a little bit tougher than we were.
I think they were a little bit crazier than you were, probably. The 101st Airborne had a reputation as being...
Well, they had a bad reputation, yeah. But then we were just a small battalion. They were a whole unit up there. They had a division up there.
Did you get in any fights?
No. No. My wife came up there. We'd just been married, and she caught a train and come up, got a job in an insurance, in an office up there, and I got to see her every night I could get off. So that was okay for me.
And so, did you ship with the 101st, or just train with them and then left?
We trained in the same. That was an old fort up there. What do you call it? It was one of the forts. It wasn't a camp. It was a fort. Fort Ethan Allen.
And what was your training like? What did you train to do?
We had classes and everything. We didn't do any shooting up there. We'd had that already at Meade. Most of it was driving, different. They sent a lot of boys off to different schools up there, radio school, water school, stuff like that. And the rest of us got just normal training. We marched every day, the reveille in the evenings and things like that. They kept us busy.
And so by the time you got to France, you were ready to quit training and get into the action?
Yeah, we did a lot of still picking up equipment at that time. And because I can remember going over to into New York area. I can't think of the name of the town. Almost, I leave one day and be back the next. Go over and pick up a load of equipment to hand out that we didn't have. Which kind of getting things together.
And once you arrived in France, were you still driving a truck?
Yeah. We spent the fall up there, and then no, we didn't spend the fall. We only spent about 3 months up there, if I remember correct. And then we took a train down to Nashville to maneuvers. And we were stationed around the Murfreesboro area. And that was interesting. There we got a taste of what really went on there. And that was very interesting. My wife followed me down there too. She come down there and got a job in a insurance office. And I was lucky enough to get passes every couple of days so I could go in. The commanders were pretty reasonable. That was interesting because we did a lot of road building down there, and we were checking bridges and stuff like that, and training again. And that's a little thought. I was on maneuvers twice. From there we went down to Dothan, Alabama. What's the camp down there?
McClellan. McClellan?
No. It'll come to me in talking. But we went down, it's a regular camp. And we were there for a couple of months, and we went back to maneuvers in Tennessee. They pulled us back into maneuvers. We got a lot of road building there, done in there. The tanks messed up, and got experience there with our road building. Then we were transferred back down to Dothan, Ozark, and in that area there. I can't think of the name of it. And that's where we left to go up to Boston. We left out of Boston to go to England. That was a long train trip from down there up to Boston.
And how long were you at St. Mary Glees?
2 days. We pulled in there one night and left the next night. And pulled out early in the morning in a convoy that task force had. There was a name for that task force, but I don't remember what it was. That headed down, and then you'd be going down a road, and all of a sudden you'd head off to another road, and we went out into the peninsulas, to the different places, and then go back but it was pretty well handled. But we were always in the middle of it someplace, never at the front or the end, so that they could use us when they needed us. The line companies, not headquarters. I was in headquarters, but the line companies got a lot of work out of there. Saw a lot of aircraft, bombers on that trip down there. I saw more there than I did. Well, you didn't see them during the balls because it was bad.
Were you seeing a lot of German prisoners?
Oh yeah, saw a lot of German soldiers. Never had to shoot at any in that area. We chased them. We had prisoners. We didn't lose anyone after that first thing until after the ball, or during the balls then. So we were lucky there. That was different. That was a different type of war. That wasn't trench warfare or anything like that. That was out in fields. You were chasing them, or they were chasing you. Or they were blocking a road bridge, and you were trying to take it. But we were always in the middle of it, and backup, I guess you'd call us.
And did you remain a truck driver as you progressed?
I was driving a command car at that time. I'd got a command car with the lieutenant and the major. That was interesting because I knew what was going on most of the time.
And who was the lieutenant and who was the major you drove around?
Chuck Lindsley was the lieutenant. He was an adjutant. Marshall was Captain Marshall, I think his name was. I can't remember the commander's name. We had two of them. McNamara was one of them, but we left him after the balls, we left Le Havre and got another one. I cannot remember his name.
And so are there any story that you remember or incident that you remember from the time you landed at Normandy until the Bulge that winter in December? Was there much action in October and November?
We were stationed in Useldange, which is a little town in Luxembourg, within probably 10 or 12 miles of Bastogne. And I was in Bastogne damn near every day. I was headquarters for the corps that we were, and I can't remember what corps it was, 2nd or 3rd Corps. And their headquarters there. So, and I was in there every 2nd or 3rd day with the lieutenant. And I knew Bastogne pretty well from before the balls. And it was a nice little friendly town. We lived in a schoolhouse. And people were very, very friendly. Wendy went back and saw them, and they treated her as if she was a long-lost cousin, just because I was there. And I enjoyed that part. And we did a little sightseeing out of there. We were lucky. The lieutenant had met this nurse, and when he got off, I'd take him to see his nurse friend, and I enjoyed that. It kept me out of trouble too. We were there basically doing road work, local road work, and running water systems.
What were the water systems about? What was that?
We would set out a group usually two men would set up on a stream or something like that, a good well if they knew about it, and they would pull the water in and clear it for the local, not for the local people, for our people. Not only our battalion, but any troops around. We had our own water systems.
So you were providing water.
We provided water for the Army. We had, I think we had 3 crews that were, as soon as we'd stay someplace for more than a couple of days, we had these crews out, and they stayed there, two to a crew, and they stayed there all the time while we was there. That was their job, to supply water to the service.
Boy, think about how important that was.
Yeah, I guess it was.
You can't survive without water.
Well, we always had a lister bag to take our water from. You never took it out of a creek or out of a pipe. They had them always. That's the first thing was set up when you set up our camps, and kept your canteens filled out of that. The cookers you always had to have water to cook with. And then December 16th, we were pulled into the lines and made combat down around the Consdorf area, which I think is just around in Luxembourg, around the border.
Would you mind explaining for people who are watching this who might not be familiar with the Battle of the Bulge and why you were put into combat, what happened on December 16th?
That's when the ball started. They pulled us into on an alert that night, because I know I spent a 2-hour guard duty that I had never pulled before, and standing in a doorway, and was told to stand there until someone came and make sure no one came around. And it was cold by then. I can remember that, but I don't remember what town it was in. I can't tell you that.
So all of a sudden you went from being a staff car driver or Jeep driver to
Basically, yes.
You had a rifle and you were...
Rifle, yeah, loaded, yes.
How did you feel about that?
Didn't bother me. I handled guns all my life. I did a lot of hunting in Pennsylvania, so I knew how to handle a gun. It didn't bother me. By that time, I'd seen enough that it was my life or theirs. And I think we all felt that way.
So what is your memory of the Bulge, of those weeks or days?
From the 16th to the 24th was miserable. It was cold, snow on the ground. Wasn't bad for me. I was lucky. I was in headquarters. Our line companies got hit pretty hard. B Company lost company commander. Quite a few soldiers got killed there. And for those, most of my time was spent either carrying messages out to the line companies. We were each in a small town. A, B, and C were in a little town. We were in the town of Consdorf itself. And doing duty on radio, doing guard duty, running messages, back and forth. So it was a little tough at that time. One of the things I do remember is seeing. We lived in tents, by the way. We weren't living in houses. We were living in tents at that time. And seeing some of our boys got killed in headquarters company. We had no way of getting them out. They were laid out in front of the tent, 4 or 5 of them blanketed up. And that stayed with me the rest of my life. Young fellows that I knew, then forgot. I can't even think of their names now. And that was rough. We had a couple of experiences there. On the way in, I was in a command car then. I had a command car hit with shrapnel. And I didn't find out till 2 weeks later what it hit. We knew we got hit. In a command car, there's just to my left shoulder, there's a tire. A spare tire was there. And the lieutenant and I both knew we got hit. And a couple of weeks later, I found out the tire was flat. And I had to pull it out. A piece of shrapnel about this size was in there, just off my right shoulder, left shoulder. So we knew that the vessel, the truck had been hit, but I'm glad that tire was there because it very well could have got me too. That's about the closest that I came. I don't think I ever had any shells or gun shells around me, but I had shrapnel around me there, and I had another shrapnel again in an attic where I climbed up into an attic so we get radio communication. We couldn't get it down below. If you get in the attic, you could get it, and I relieved a fellow that got sick up there, and you could hear the shrapnel going around the room when it hit under a barrage. That's about as close as I came to it right there. And but B Company got hit in a little town. We lost quite a few there. And we had lost a couple. Some of our drivers got hit in going back to pick up supplies and bring them in, and got overrun. We lost a couple drivers that way. Off on it, I don't think we lost more than 35, 40 people out of a company, which isn't too bad. It hurts, but I think we lost 4 officers out of our group that were killed in action. Most of them are buried in Luxembourg City at the cemetery there.
Did things get easier than after the bulge?
We pulled out of the bulge. They pulled us out of the lines Christmas Eve. Pulled us back into Luxembourg. And by the time that evening came in, not too many of us were sober enough to know what was going on. And we pulled us back and put us in a school. And I do remember a first general I was ever near came in there, and I can't think of his name. He was one of the division commanders that we were under that in the bulge. Come in and congratulate us for a job we done and left. It was nice. And then the next day was Christmas Day. I went down to Whistledown with about 4 of us went down there and had Christmas dinner with people down in the town that where we had been before. And that was into the bulge. We then were transferred to back into Bastogne. About the time of I know the time, and they could find the date, don't remember, when the 101st moved out of Bastogne, we moved into the headquarters, the barracks that they were in. And we followed them from there on till the war was over. As they moved, we moved. And we did a lot of road work and backup work for them. That was our job after the balls. And we got down into, let's see, where was that? Just before the war ended, they didn't have much force. They made us military police. And they moved us into an area down along the border of Germany, and I can't tell you where it was. I never saw a map, but the towns were Jena and Apala. And I know that was because we were in, one of our line companies was in Apala. No, we were in Apala. One of our line companies was in Jena, and Jena is where the optic company, German optic company, I can't think of the name of it now, was. Made some of the best optics in the world. And how I remember that, the captain, he was a captain by then, and I went over there in a command car one day and backed up to the truck loading place, and they loaded it with binoculars. I mean, we had a load of binoculars that we then handed out. I ended up with a pair. I still have a pair of them at home. But the military police was interesting because it was to me because I was able to go into different headquarters as we traveled around. And we got our picks of whatever. The Germans were required to turn in guns, cameras, knives, things like that. And that's where I picked up one of my cameras there, and I picked up a shotgun that I brought home in my barracks bag and gave to my dad. My son has it now. And I got my camera. I had the classes. That's about all I had is that. But that was interesting, doing military government work too. The people were friendly. We run into a few, really got a displaced persons camp is where they really made us welcome. And then, after the war was over, everyone's worried about going home. I was lucky. I was married. I had enough points that I didn't have to go, and they told us. And they moved our outfit back to Antwerp, and we built Camp Top Hat at Antwerp. And that was interesting because they didn't have anything for me to do. They made an electrician out of me. I learned a little bit of electric in the tents and putting up the lights in the tents. And that was interesting. And then when that was over, the lieutenant got transferred to headquarters in Paris. And that left me free there in Antwerp. And when before that though, I had a very interesting job. He got the job of going to Lucky Strike and interviewing troops going back to the States. And he took me with him as a driver. And I interviewed enlisted men, he interviewed officers. And our job was to go in and, mine was to go into the enlisted men quarters and talk to them, see if they had any complaints or if they were happy, stuff like that. And that was interesting because it's a day's ride, basically, from Paris to Antwerp and then back. So it would take a day or two to go down, a day or two to come back, and 3 days work. It was interesting.
I bet it was interesting. What did these GIs have to say? Do you remember? Did they have any complaints? Or?
Oh yes, you had a lot of complaints. You had mostly about food and how they handled, but nothing really bad. A lot of them were dissatisfied, but the quarters weren't bad.
Did you see a lot of guys when you were doing these interviews who had seen a lot of action?
Oh yeah, they were the ones who were being shot out of Lucky Strike. It was interesting. I enjoyed that. We did that for, I think we made about 3 or 4 trips now, weeks out of that. And
then did you have to type up or something
I gave my report to him.
Okay.
I just they had a sheet to fill out.
Okay.
Names, a name, a serial number, and if it's anything serious, write it down. Things like that. And all I did was turn mine over to him because I had nothing else to do. It was interesting, especially the trips back and forth. And after that, when he was I had a chance to stay in the service at that time too. He was transferred to a engineering battalion in Germany, colored, black engineering, and he wanted me to go along with him. I told him no. I wanted out. I'd had it. There was no way. He wanted me to stay with him. He said, I'll make you a master sergeant of the motor pool immediately. I said, no, thank you, sir. I'm going home as soon as I can. And he left. And he left his Jeep with me. So I had his Jeep for about, I guess it was another month before I got, and all he asked was turn it in and get a receipt for it. So I made friends with the first sergeant because he had no transmission. And we were able to travel around Antwerp area pretty well as we wanted for about a month. And that was interesting.
And when did you come home? Do you remember that?
Yeah. Finally got orders, and I can't remember how the hell I got over to Lucky Strike, over to Le Havre. I come out of Le Havre. We went over there and stayed in the hotel for a couple of days, and come home on the USS Wasp, a aircraft carrier. And I thought the one going over this way, over there, was crowded. That was worse yet. That was absolutely miserable. But we came back in about 5 or 6 days. I don't remember when. We come into Staten Island and saw the Statue of Liberty. But that was a rough trip for meals, sleeping quarters. If I remember correctly, I think I had one, either the top bunk or the next to the top one, and that was miserable getting into. And that the ship had not been repaired. The front end of that was still messed up. I can remember going up to the front end when we get 2 or 3 hours a day above up on top deck. And all you did was go up and walk around. There was nothing to do. But the weather wasn't that bad coming back. Although it was in January. The weather wasn't bad. And landed in New York, went from there to, I can't remember the first name, spent 3 days, and then went to Indiantown Gap. And were released out of Indiantown Gap. My mother, dad, and wife met me there.
What was that like?
Good. It was interesting. We went home. Mom cooked a big meal. I spent most of the night, that night, beside the tub, throwing up. I ate something that didn't agree with me or something, and I was sick for 2 days. I think it was emotions.
What were your emotions at that time?
I've always said I'm not an emotional person, but I guess I was, because I was glad to get home. I was just glad to get home and see people. I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My wife lived with my mother and dad. They took care of her. She worked all the time I was gone. One of the things she did do, and I didn't know about it, till I started back to college. She saved every allotment check, deposited them back. She never cashed one of them. That made a difference. I didn't do much after that for a couple of months. Then my brother-in-law and I opened a gas station. We had enough money between us to do it. He was an officer in the engineers, but only he went to the Pacific. And just about the time we just started it, I got a letter from Franklin Marshall College. You have a copy of the letter there, saying that I had been given a leave of absence from F&M, and I could come back at any time I wanted to. Well, that changed my whole outlook on what to do right then and there. We sold a gas station, and I went back to school in August. I went back up, and I left Ruth at home, and I went back for football practice and made the football team. And I got my meal. The government was paying for my education by then. I played football for 3 years, lettered, and got $105 a month from the government. And my wife worked for the secretary to the president's secretary and made $100 a month. We lived pretty high at that time. And then I didn't play football in my senior year because I had a daughter born in August, and I had enough credits that I could graduate in February, so I didn't finish. I left school in January of '50 and come back for graduation in June. And that's my education.
Who are these 2 women in this photograph here? That's over in Belgium.
I can't give you their names. Are they on here? The lieutenant
Lieutenant Lindsley.
found this place. It's a little bar, about 2 miles, I don't know what direction from Husseldon's, that he went to, and I would take him out there in the evenings, leave him. I wasn't allowed in. It was for officers. And then I'd go back and pick him up whenever he wanted me. Tell him, he'd give me a time, I'd go pick him back up. And the people I got to know through him, and that was the mother, the owner, and I think it's a granddaughter that they had there. We just became very good friends. And I took that picture and gave them a picture of it. This is the nurse that the lieutenant married and one of her friends.
Mm-hmm. And where was this taken?
That was taken in Antwerp. After the war, while we were running around, had the vehicle. We went down to Nancy from Antwerp one weekend. The nurse was down there on a train, a hospital train, and I took them down. And that was the interesting weekend for me because I was the only enlisted man around. And they tried to find quarters for me. They had no quarters for me. They put me up in the hospital bed. I ate with the nurses and the officers, and the only enlisted man in there. They had no place to feed me, but they took care of me, and they were just as nice as could be. I really enjoyed that, of being treated an enlisted man with the officers. But she was a wonderful. Betty was a wonderful person. Well, these were taken in Luxembourg. September 45.
Okay, so that's maybe when you were interviewing the
Well,
GIs.
No, this was taken, I had a pass.
Okay.
Had a 3-day pass weekend pass or something.
What was Paris like in September 1945?
Too much for me. It was a wild place. Pig Alley was a wild place, believe me.
What was Pig Alley?
That's where all the soldiers went. House of ill reputes all up and down the road. I think I got the biggest kick though. Didn't know too much about him during the war, but after the war, Ruth and I took a trip back over, and we were taking a taxi someplace to eat in Brussels, and the cab driver took us down through the Strip District, and we kept going. It was my wife and Pat Franz was with us that time, Wendy, and kept going down, up and down these streets, making comments, and finally Ruth said to me, well, "What is this?" I said, "Honey, don't you know where you're at?" She said, "No, it's a house of real repute." And there were girls sitting in the windows.
Tell me about that.
That was awful. And again, I would have never gone if it hadn't been for the lieutenant wanted to go. And I guess he was able to do it because we went.
When?
I can't give you a date. Well, it was very, very shortly after it was, we got in there. We weren't more than a week after they opened it up, after troops went in. Because I don't even remember how long it took us to get there. But we went in, drove through. We didn't spend long there, but it wasn't nice.
What do you remember?
Dead people. It wasn't nice at all.
Did you get out of the Jeep and walk around?
No, I did not. Mm-mm. We just went in and drove through and left. We didn't spend any time. I don't even know if we were legally supposed to be there. But I was just being told what to do. That was it, just the two of us.
Did you have any idea that the Germans were doing that?
Oh yeah, we knew. We heard about it. We'd heard stories. There was rumors all the time about what was going on.
How long had it been since the Buchenwald had been liberated when you went? Was it a matter of days?
I would say less than 10 days. It was real quick because we were in the vicinity. And it was one of these quick trips that that we took. We took no pictures.
Did you see any living?
Oh yeah, there were still some there, yeah. Not many.
Would people who actually lived there have known what was happening?
Oh, they had to. They had to.